Chapter 250, Fleeting Freedom, 2008. Days began to go by. Before I knew it, I was in a hole for 3 months and I haven't seen anybody or heard anything. No one was telling me nothing. No one knew what was going on. No one knew nothing. I was just stuck, doing dead time in a raggedy old prison cell in a raggedy old prison building, struggling to breathe in this raggedy old prison heat, wearing raggedy old prison clothes, sleeping on raggedy old prison sheets, 2 showers a week, giving raggedy old worn out socks and raggedy old worn out t-shirts and raggedy old worn out boxes. The guards used to walk past my cell and look at me as if I was Bin Laden's co-defendant, as if I was waiting for a transfer to Guantanamo. I was an anomaly living in the annals of a raggedy old dungeon built in 1904. They stayed away from me as if I was radioactive. They all spoke with the counselors and even the warden, and even they themselves didn't know what was going on or what to do with me. I had no pending cases, no convictions, no detainers, and no warrants. I was technically a free man that couldn't be released. The Department of Justice ordered the Bureau of Prisons not to release me, just as Interpol in Rome, Italy did years before when they were searching for my brother. They also ordered the Bureau of Prisons not to release me. I was being detained without a detainer, and no one knew why. No one knew how, and no one knew when it would be over. I was just here. I made phone calls, and the people I called made phone calls to other people who made phone calls to other people. But days continued to pass with no resolution. Just more phone calls to more people. I filed an emergency writ of habeas corpus with the federal courts in Georgia, asking for a reprieve or an explanation. They had a prototypical response. It wasn't filed correctly. I refiled. Then it wasn't filed in the right jurisdiction. I needed to file in DC, since technically I was in their custody. I filed that. DC said I needed to file in Maryland since that's where I was arrested. I filed that. Maryland said I needed to file in Georgia since they had custody of me. I refiled that. I was being sent in circles and no lawyer would touch my case while months upon months continued to pass. No lawyer wanted anything to do with me as if I was the enemy of the state. They saw me as an unnecessary burden, a headache, a problem, worse than a man in a turban. A man with no pending cases but being treated as a man convicted of murder. I continued filing legal paperwork to anybody that might listen. I didn't have any other option. Stabbing a cop out of frustration would only justify them keeping me in prison for much longer. Plus the cop had nothing to do with me being here. He was just a pawn at the bottom of the totem pole. I had no chance of attempting to escape because I was in the hole of a penitentiary with a 40-foot wall and helicopter wires. I sank into my thoughts and wrote another screenplay. I released my frustration on paper. It was my only release. I wrote a story about a man being held unjustly in prison, and upon release, he vows revenge on everybody who treated him unfair. He kills dozens of correctional officers and parole officials before he falls in love with a pretty correctional officer. While writing the screenplay, I got a letter from the beautiful officer from Upper Marlboro Jail in Maryland that brought me the cell phone. Her job was stressing her out and she needed someone to talk to. She asked if I had any plans when I came home and if I needed somewhere to stay. Her home was available. It was also 2 pictures in the envelope. She heard my case got overturned, so she reached out to me. Wow, I asked myself, could life imitate art while art was imitating life? chapter 251. Still. Before I knew it, 8 months had passed and I still had no pending cases. Still had no convictions. Still had no detainers or warrants, and I was still in the hole in Atlanta Penitentiary. Everyone on the compound thought I was home, not knowing I was still locked in the basement of this old raggedy dungeon. I finally sat still and got a lawyer from Atlanta to visit me. He contacted the DOJ, who contacted the parole officials, who claims they have been looking for me and couldn't find me. They said my name wasn't in the system anymore. I filed a lawsuit against the DOJ and the U.S. Parole Commission immediately. Because they are federal entities, you have to get permission from them first if you wanted to sue them. My request to sue was denied. Fuck them. I still filed anyway. My counselors finally got a warrant from the parole board and asked me to sign it. I refused. I knew the power of my signature. Still, I refused because I had already signed it right after I got the 16.5-year sentence that was ultimately overturned. They were now claiming that it was a mistake and it was voided. Well, that was your mistake, not mine. Before I knew it, 9 months had passed, and I was still in the hole. On the 10th month, finally, with no case, no convictions, detainers, or warrants, they were shipping me out. I didn't know where. I went through the routine strip searches, cuffs, and shackles, but this time it felt awkward. It felt unjust. I was in a gray area with nothing legally holding me in prison. My almost 17-year sentence and conviction had been overturned and dismissed almost 1 year ago. Yet, I'm still in the same prison. But worse, I was in the hole of that same prison. On the bus ride, I continued to think of my screenplay and how I could intertwine the characters. But also, could it become reality? It was shaping up to be that way. It was shaping up for me to retaliate on every correctional officer, parole official, and politician. I had all their names on a list, a hit list. They all deserved to die. The beautiful correctional officer that was writing me wanted to pick me up if I was being released. She wanted to be the first person I saw, just like the screenplay. She wanted to be the first and only woman I slept with, just like the screenplay. And she said she would quit her job if I came to her, just like the screenplay. Damn. As the van was driving up the dark highway, I had the slightest idea where I was being taken. I thought maybe Guantanamo Bay military prison in Cuba. I thought maybe a black site in Poland or Thailand. Judging from how I was being treated, I thought I was maybe going to ADX Colorado Supermax where my brother was still being held. I knew they didn't want me in society, but to what extent they were willing to go. They had already charged me with murders I didn't commit. They had already charged me with fabricated gun charges. They had already raided my premises without a warrant. They had already tried to get me to plead guilty so they could give me 30. They had already tried and convicted me in trial on a case that should have been dismissed. They had already sent me to an ancient dungeon, and now that I fought them and had the whole conviction and sentence thrown out, they held me in their filthy hole for 10 months. And now they were trying something else. But no matter what they bargained, the intended consequence was consistently falling. I was still a sharper Martian, hard as a marble. My jargon was indestructible as carbon with no pardons. I walked on any yard or garden like it was carpets and made wardens take caution by what I sharpened. Hardened like the fallen Benny Lawson, bar none. As the bus rode up the dark highway, I resigned to not caring as a defense mechanism. Some hidden hand was making decisions on my life and I had no say-so. It was out of my hands. It was something that just had to be dealt with as it comes. Come what may. I made sure not to sleep on this ride. I wanted to know where we were heading. After all, I was the only person in the van. After around 10 hours, things started to look familiar. The highway was leading to DC. After a while, the Washington Monument could be seen in the distance. The dome of the Capitol came into view. I still wasn't sure where I was going. DC is the most ruthless and powerful city in the world. It has underground highways and prisons for high-powered officials, assassins, and spies. It has interrogation torture chambers and nondescript buildings all over the city. In Northern Virginia, it would sometimes hold high-powered DC prisoners on military bases in and around DC. I may end up in one of them. Every day it's convoys of armored SUVs with fully armed men hanging out the window and sunroof with Uzis and silencers blocking the streets. Every day was police cars, limos, and police bikes shutting down the streets to move politicians and gangsters from one place to another. Every other car in DC was a decoy or a potential agent. Even foreign luxury cars had hidden strobe lights in their radiator grills. Underground highways for cars and trains, including a shadow government and an ultra-secret military task force. Some street signs have evacuation routes and hidden messages written on them. Color codes were all over the city for high-powered officials' directions in case of some type of attack by their adversaries, with fighter jets always on standby. Mercenary assassins and spies were amongst us at all times, and spotting them was almost impossible unless you had a trained eye. DC has more police officers and police agencies per capita than anywhere in the world. 750 per 100,000 compared to the average of 200 per 100,000. DC has the highest proportion of police officers to citizens of any state or territory. DC by itself has the Marshal Service, Park Police, Metropolitan Police Department, Secret Service, District of Columbia Protective Services Divisions, Homeland Security, Metro Transit Police, Housing Authority, Cathedral Police, Library Police, Airport Authority, Department of Humane Law Enforcement, Department of Corrections, Amtrak Police, Armed Forces Retirement Police, CIA, National Guard, FBI, ATF, DEA, Federal Protective Service, Government Printing Office Uniformed Police Branch, Military Police, Coast Guard Police, Smithsonian Police, Supreme Court Police, Capitol Police, Mint Police, Federal Reserve Police, Treasury Police, Pentagon Police, Postal Inspection Service Police, Department of Defense Police, American University Police, Georgetown University Police, Catholic University Police, Gallaudet University Police, George Washington University Police, Howard University Police, and University of DC Police. They all have arrest powers in their jurisdiction, and a few had jurisdiction over the whole city. I lived in an occupied police state. I rotated on what could be considered a large military base. DC was dangerous and ruthless, and everyone here broke the law on different levels. It is a psychological war zone. I figured I was going to DC jail, but with this city, you never know. The van eventually pulled up to the federal court building in downtown DC, and after the security checks, the van pulled onto a large freight elevator. The elevator then went down 5 stories. I was taken off and taken into a room to sign warrant papers from the parole board. Again, I refused. They were pissed. I told them I understand the power of my signature. They were trying to cover up my illegal incarceration. After a few hours, I was then taken to DC jail. Again.